Hi everyone, Kevin here. Today, we're going to learn the fundamentals of Blender, a free and powerful 3D creation tool used for modeling, animation, sculpting, and rendering. It's popular with beginners and also professionals alike, and it's open source, and best of all, it's entirely free to use. In this video, we're going to create a 3D chocolate chip cookie fresh from the ovens of the world-famous Kevin Cookie Company. We'll add and edit objects, work with materials, and by the end, render your first image. Let's dive in. First off, to get Blender, head to the following website. You can get to it right at the link that you see here at the bottom of the screen. Once you're on the site, click on the big blue download button. Again, it's completely free and it works on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. In this video, I'll be using Windows. Install it just like you would any other app. When you first open Blender, you'll see a splash screen with some artwork at the top, and then you have a bunch of different options. You can click anywhere outside of that box to close it, and now we're here in the main interface. Before we dive into building the cookie, there are a few settings that you might want to tweak to make your Blender experience smoother. In the top left-hand corner, let's click on the Edit menu and then go down to Preferences. This opens up Preferences, and let's click into the Interface tab, and right here at the top, we have something called Resolution Scale. Here, I could increase that, and you'll notice what happens to all the different menus, all the different panels. It increases the size, or over here, I could decrease the scale. So choose a number that you're comfortable with. I'll stick with the default of 1. Then, over on the left-hand side, let's now switch into System. Right at the top, we have a category called Cycles Render Devices. Click on the one titled CUDA, and if you have a dedicated GPU or graphics card, make sure to select it here. This will ensure that you get faster rendering later on. Then, here's a really big one. Go down the page just a little bit to the category titled Memory and Limits. And here we could increase the number of undo steps. By default, it's set to 32, but let's set it to, let's say something like 100. This ensures you can backtrack through more of your changes while you're learning. Once you're all done making these changes, in the bottom left-hand corner, let's click on the hamburger menu, and here we have the option to save preferences. Let's click on that, and that way it'll stick for all future projects. Once you're done, in the top right-hand corner, let's close out of this view. When you launch Blender for the first time, the interface may feel a little bit overwhelming. And don't worry, that's how I felt the first time I launched it. But don't worry, we'll walk through just what you need. Right in the center is what's called the 3D viewport. This is where all of the creative work happens: modeling, sculpting, animating, and more. To move around your scene, hold the middle mouse button and then move your mouse around to rotate the view. Give that a try. You can also hold the Shift key together with the middle mouse, and that'll allow you to pan your scene. Lastly, if you scroll the mouse wheel, you could zoom in, and then you could also zoom out. On the top right of the viewport, you'll see what's called the Gizmo, kind of a fun name. It's a visual tool that you could use for navigation. You can click and drag the circle to orbit around the scene. Right down below, you could click on the magnifying glass to zoom in, and here you could also zoom out. Lastly, you could also click on the hand icon to pan. Within the Gizmo, you'll see these icons X, Y, and Z. These are axis labels, and that allows you to snap to specific views. Try clicking on them. When you hover over them, you'll see that you can also use shortcut keys. Here's an example. I'll hover over the Y, and you'll see that the shortcut key is 1 on your numpad, and that jumps us to the front view. You can also press on the X, or number 3, and that'll give us the side view. And here, when I hover over Z, we'll see that the shortcut key is 7, and that'll give me the top view. These are great shortcuts for precise alignment within the 3D viewport. One helpful thing about Blender: there are usually multiple ways to do the exact same thing, whether that's through menus, buttons, or even keyboard shortcuts. So use whatever feels the most comfortable to you. With navigation down, let's now look at some of the surrounding interface and also panels. Before we start building, let's explore the key interface panels that surround the 3D viewport. Over here on the left-hand side, you'll see what's called the toolbar. You can show or hide this by pressing T on your keyboard. Here, I'll press T and it disappears. Press T again, and there the toolbar reappears. Within the toolbar, you'll see all these different tools. Here's an example. I'll hover over this icon, and you'll see that this is the Move tool. Right over here, this is rotate. Right down here, we have scale. As I hover over, within the overlay, you'll also see the shortcut key. As an example, here within Move, you'll see that the shortcut key is G on your keyboard. You might be wondering, why is it G when it's called the Move tool? Well, it stands for grab. Right down here, the rotate tool, you'll see that the shortcut key is R for rotate. Right down here with scale, you'll see that it's S for scale. Those are easy to remember and also shortcut keys that you'll likely use very often. Along with hovering over one of these tools to see what it is, you can also hover your mouse over the edge of the toolbar, and you'll notice that my mouse icon changes. I can now press and hold, and I could drag out the toolbar. So here it gives a little more space, and if you drag it out enough, you'll actually see the name next to the tool. So this way you know immediately what it is. Over here, I can also press and hold, and here we can drag it back to the original size. The tools available change depending on the mode that you're in. Right up on top, you'll see this drop down, and we're currently in object mode. This gives you quick access to tools like move, rotate, and scale, but we could also switch into a different mode. Here, as an example, I'll click into edit mode, and you'll notice I now have many more different tools on this list. Right up on top, you can edit the vertices. Over here, you could edit an edge of an object, and over here, you could select an entire face of the object that you have in your 3D viewport. We also have the addition of some new tools. Here's an example. We could extrude a region of an object. Right over here, you could inset a face. If we go down a little bit more, we have something called loop cut. And don't worry what these are right now. We'll get into some of these a little bit later. Blender has numerous different interaction modes. Right up on top, we're currently in the edit mode, and we've already looked at the object mode, but we also have other ones here. In this video, we're going to focus on the object mode, which lets you move, rotate, and scale objects, and edit mode, which lets you modify the geometry of a single object. Again, you can switch between all these different modes using this menu in the top left-hand corner of the 3D viewport. Or alternatively, here, I'll click into the 3D viewport. You could also press the Tab key on your keyboard, and that too will also switch between the object mode and the edit mode. As you can tell, Blender has lots of different shortcut keys and many different ways to access the same tools. On the top right of the screen, we have what's called the outliner. This is like your scene manager. It lists every object in your project. You'll see that a scene is made up of collections, or basically just a way to group different objects. You'll notice that we have 3 different objects in our project. Here we have the camera, and when I click on it, you'll see in the 3D viewport, it highlights that object. We also have a cube. When I click on that, here we see that highlighted, and we also have a light right up here. Now, for each object, you could either show the object or you could hide it. As an example, let's take the cube. I'll click on this eyeball icon, and there we hide the cube, and click on it again, and there we show it once again. You can also rename the different objects in your project. So here, if I want to give the cube a different name, I could simply double click on that, and here I could type in a new name. That way you can stay nice and organized, and you know what every different object is within your project. With cube selected in the outliner down below, I can see all the different properties associated with my cube. Let's switch over to light, and here I see all of light's properties. I'll go back to cube. Within the properties panel, you can adjust all sorts of different things like the transformations. Right down below, we could also apply different materials. If we click on this icon, we could add different modifiers. If you're unsure of what any of these different icons over here do, you could simply hover over, and here you'll see a quick description of what it is. That's especially helpful as you're learning the interface. Right over here, I'll click back into the main properties. One last piece of the interface that we'll look at before we jump into building. Right up on top, next to the gizmo, we have this little arrow icon. And if we click on that, that opens up what's called the sidebar. And here you could adjust things like the object's location, the rotation, the scale, and dimensions. We also have a few other things like tool and also view. Now, as a handy shortcut key, you can press the N key on your keyboard. And when I press that, that toggles away the sidebar. And if I press it again, that brings it back. Now, you might be wondering, well, why is it the N key? Well, maybe it's because it was not used for anything else. I know we've covered a lot so far, but don't worry about memorizing all of this now. We'll revisit these as we go. But it's really helpful when you're getting started just to know what's where before we dive in. Before we officially start modeling our chocolate chip cookie, let's get comfortable adding and manipulating objects in Blender. Now, first off, let's make sure that we're in the object mode. In the top left-hand corner, you can confirm that in this menu. Now, again, if you're in a different mode and you'd like to get back to object, simply press the Tab key, and here you could toggle between the edit mode and the object mode. To add an object, over on the left-hand side toolbar at the very bottom, you'll see a plus icon along with an object, or in this case, a cube. I'll press on that, and that turns it on, so I can now add a cube. You'll notice some grid lines underneath your mouse that will help us position where this cube goes. So let's put it maybe right here. I'll press and hold on my mouse, and here I can define the base of my object. So let's place it right there. Now, when you release your mouse, you can lift it up, and then you can define the height of your object. I think that looks good. So here, I'll press my mouse again, and look at that. We have officially added our very first object in the 3D viewport in Blender. Congratulations. Over on the right-hand side in the outliner, you'll now notice that I have a new object appearing as part of my scene collection, cube.001. Let's try adding another cube. Over on the left-hand side, I still have add cube selected. So here I can simply draw a new cube. Let me start drawing a cube right here, but let's say I want it to be a perfect square. I could press the Shift key on my keyboard, and that forces it to have a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, when I release, let's draw it up, and there I have a perfect cube. And here, I'll press with my mouse, and look at that, we now have another cube. Let's say we want to add some other shapes. Over on the left-hand side, we can press and hold on this icon, and here we have a few other options. We can add a cone. I'll press on that, and here, let's draw a cone. Go back over, press and hold, and let's add a cylinder. Here, I can now draw that, release, go up. And look, we now have a few different objects within our 3D viewport. I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but again, there are lots of different ways that you can do things in Blender. To add an object, you can also press Shift-A on your keyboard. So right over here, that opens up the Add menu. And right here, we see the option to add a mesh. And here we could add a cube. You could also add a sphere, a cylinder, a cone, all those same options, but we have even more different meshes along with different objects within this menu. Now that we've added a few different objects to the 3D viewport, you probably want to know, well, how do you move something around? Maybe I don't want this cylinder to be right here. Over here, I could select the object. Then, over on the left-hand side, we have the Move tool. I'll press on that. And when I click on Move, right over here, we have different options. Here, I can move it up, or we can move it down. Here, I can move it along the X-axis. And over here, we could also move it along the Y-axis. As I move the object around, you'll also notice in the properties that the location reflects where I move it. So here, I'll move it over and look at the Y-axis. The location is changing. Now, one thing you could also do, you could click into properties, and here too, you could also adjust the location of an object. Again, many different ways to do the exact same thing. Along with clicking on the toolbar, you can also use the shortcut keys. When I hover over again, we'll see that the shortcut key for move or grab is G. Now, with this object selected, I'll press G, and that opens up move mode. Now I can move this object around. But how do I know exactly where I'm placing it? You could also move it along one of the axes. As an example, I could press the X key on my keyboard, and here I can move it along the X axis. Or I could press Y, and then I can move it along the Y axis. Or we could press Z on the keyboard, and then I can move it along the Z axis. So again, many ways to do the same thing. Let's try a few of the other object mode tools. Over here, we have the rotate tool. I'll click on that, and here I can now rotate an object. So here, I could rotate it along the X-axis. Here, we can see rotating it. I could rotate along the Y-axis, like that. And here, I can select this blue one to move it along the Z-axis. And there you can see how you could rotate an object. Again, I could also click on an object, and here we could press R, and I could rotate just by using the shortcut key. And again, if you'd like to rotate along one of the axes, here I'll press X, I could rotate that way, or Y, and here we could press Z. So that applies to any one of these object tools. You could rotate, you could move, or you could even scale along one of these axes. Let's now try scaling an object. I'll select the cone, and then over on the left-hand side, let's click on Scale. Right over here, I can now scale the entire object by clicking on this white circle, and here I could expand it. We could make it a lot bigger, that's a big cone, or we could also make it a lot smaller. So there you could scale an object, and here too, you could also scale along any one of these axes. So there's along the X, here's along the Y, and we could also scale it along the Z. So again, lots of different control over these different objects. Now, try adding a few more objects, and once you do, try moving them around, try rotating them, and try scaling them. You could use a toolbar over on the left-hand side, or experiment with the shortcut keys and see what you're most comfortable with. Once you're ready, up on top, let's click on the Select Box tool. And over here, let's select all of the different test objects. So I have my cone selected, but press the Shift key and then click on this cube. I'll press the Shift key and select this one, and that one. Over on the right-hand side, I can see that I have all these different objects selected. To remove them, you can press the X key on your keyboard, or you could press the Delete key, and that removes all the different test objects. And with that, we're now ready to move on to building a chocolate chip cookie. Let's now add the base of our chocolate chip cookie. To do that, in the left-hand corner, make sure that you're in object mode. Then, on the left-hand side, let's add a shape. I could press and hold on this, and there's the option to add a cylinder. That looks a little bit like a cookie. I'll click on this, and over here we get that grid line that helps us place this shape, or this object. So over here, I'll press and hold right here, and here we can define the base of our cookie. Now, I wanna make sure that this is a perfect circle. We really take quality control seriously here at the Kevin Cookie Company. Again, to do that, press the Shift key on your keyboard, and there we have a 1-to-1 ratio. And over here, I can now release. Now we could drag up a little bit. Let's say maybe right at about, let's say right there. Ooh, I don't know, that might be too big for a cookie. So I want to scale it down a little bit, and that's far too high. So to do that, over on the left-hand side, let's click on the Scale tool. And over here, I have all my different scale controls. Now I'd like to bring down the Z axis a little bit. So over here, I'll click on the blue. And here, I could pull that down. And let's reduce the height a little bit. And that's probably a good height for a cookie. I think that looks great. When you look at this cookie, the edges aren't really that smooth. We see all these different edges and all of these different faces. To fix that, let's right-click on this object. This opens up the object menu, and at the very top, we have an option called Shade Smooth. That way the surface will look soft and also rounded, just like a real cookie. I'll click on that, and ooh, that looks a lot better. In Blender, Shade Smooth is a shading option that makes the surface of a mesh appear smooth by interpolating lighting across all the different faces, rather than showing each face as a flat polygon. Let's now go to the top right-hand corner to the outliner. And here we see that the cookie is currently called Cylinder. That won't help us later on as we start adding more objects. So let's double click on Cylinder, and here we could give it a new name. Let's delete that, and let's type in Cookie. That way, we know where the cookie is. Of course, it's not a chocolate chip cookie if we don't have any chocolate chips. So we need to add some. To add a new object to the 3D viewport, let's try using the shortcut key. Let's press Shift A. That opens up the Add menu. Let's go down to Mesh, and right in here we have the option for a UV sphere. A chocolate chip is kind of like a sphere, so let's click on that, and that's now added a sphere, but you'll notice that it's fairly small here. In fact, I don't even see it. So here, let's scale it up a little bit. Ooh, there it is. There I can see the chocolate chip, but I need to move it up a little bit. So over on the left-hand side, let's go to the Move tool. I'll click on that, and here I can pull it up. Ooh, that's a big chocolate chip. So actually we need to scale that down. Let's try using the shortcut key. I'll press S, and here I can now drag it down. That's probably an appropriate size for a chocolate chip. I think that looks good. Now let's press the G tool. That opens up Move, and I can press Z, and let's move along the Z axis. So over here, let's place it so it sits within the cookie. Ooh, I think that looks good. Now I could press the middle mouse button, and here we could adjust or orbit around to see how that placement looks. That looks nice. Just like we did with the cookie, I'd also like for the chocolate chip to be a little bit smoother. So let's right click on this, and then we have the option for Shade Smooth. Let's click on that, and there we have our chocolate chip. Of course, we're generous here at the Kevin Cookie Company. We don't just put one chocolate chip on a cookie, we need more. Now, I don't want to have to go in and add another sphere, adjust the scale, and make it smooth. So instead, we can duplicate the object. With this sphere selected, you can press Shift and D, D for duplicate, on your keyboard, and that will produce another chocolate chip. Over on the right-hand side in the outliner, you can now see that I have another sphere. Now, I could position this wherever I'd like. Let's maybe put one there, but it's a little high, so let's move that down and place it into the cookie. Now, I can press Shift D again. That gives us another chocolate chip. And here, I'll go through and add a whole bunch of different chocolate chips to my cookie, and then also randomly distribute them. Feel free to do the same on your end. Let's now build a tray that our cookie will sit on. I'll use my mouse wheel to zoom out. And to build the tray, I'm going to use a cube. Over on the left-hand side, let's click on this, press and hold, and here we have the option to add a cube. I'll press on that. Now, I want this to be a perfect square. So again, I'll use the Shift key as I'm drawing my cube. So over here, let's press Shift, and that way we get a 1-to-1 ratio. And over here, I'll release, and let's go up just a tiny bit. Maybe I'll have my tray be fairly thin. I think that's good for now. Let's go with that. Let's move the tray over a tiny bit as we work on it. Over here, I'll select the Move tool, and let's move it so it's not intersecting with the cookie. That's a good position right now. I'd like to add a ridge to the edge of this tray. To do that, we're going to use Edit Mode. To switch into Edit Mode, up on top, you can click on this dropdown, and here we have the option for Edit Mode. But if you like to save time, again, you could also use shortcut keys. I'll press the Tab key, and that drops us into Edit Mode. Let's start by selecting the top face in Edit Mode. Right up on top, we have these different options. You could select a vertex. Over here, you'll see what that looks like. You could also select an edge. When I click on this icon here, I could select an edge. And if you press the Shift key, you could select multiple edges. Or over here, we have the option to select a face. Here, I'll select the top face. Again, you could also select multiple faces. Press the Shift key, click on another face, and then you could make multiple selections. But I only want the top one, so I'll make sure to select that. Over on the left-hand side, we're going to use the Inset tool. This creates a smaller face within this original. So over on the left-hand side, you'll see an icon or a tool that looks like this. Let's click on that. You could also use the I key. When you select that tool, go over to the face, and you'll see this white circle. If you click on the circle, you could adjust that. So here, let's make a smaller face within. I think that looks good. I'll release, and there, we now have some additional geometry. I now want to lower down this new interior face. And to do that, we can use a tool called the Extrude tool. Now, over on the left-hand side, we see it right up above the inset face. So here, I could click on that. Now, as a quick tip, you'll notice that some of these tools have this little arrow icon in the bottom right-hand corner. That lets you know that there are additional tools underneath. So here, if I press and hold, here it exposes the additional options. I just want to extrude the region, so I'll go with the first option right there. Now, over here, I see this plus icon. I'll press and hold on that, and now here I can lower this new face. And look at that, it's kind of looking like a tray. I'll release right there. I now want to move the tray so the chocolate chip cookie sits directly on the tray. To do that, let's switch back into object mode. Again, you could use that shortcut key, Tab. And when I press that, here we're back into object mode. Now over on the left-hand side, let's select the Move tool. And over here, I can now move it over. So let's move it over to my chocolate chip cookie. Here, I'll place it there, and let's pull it down in this direction. Now let's also orbit, just to make sure that it's sitting directly underneath the cookie. Here, we could adjust the view, and I think that looks pretty good, but let's also adjust the Z-axis. Ooh, that's too far. The cookie's floating now. Let's go up a tiny bit. And right at about, right there, the cookie is sitting directly on the tray. That's perfect. Look at that. This is starting to come together. Next, we're going to add some materials and colors to our chocolate chip cookie. To add a color or a material to the object, select the object. So over here, I'd like to start by adding a color to the cookie. I'll select it in the outliner right up here. Alternatively, you could also click on the object right here in the 3D viewport. Now, over on the right-hand side towards the bottom, we see the current properties. To add a material, let's go down to the icon at the bottom titled Material. I'll click on this, and here we could add a new material. I'll click on Add. And over here, you could adjust things like the surface, the color, how metallic it looks, the roughness. You have all sorts of different settings within here. So feel free to look through and you could experiment with these different options. I'm just going to stick to a simple base color, and I want it to match the color of a chocolate chip cookie. Here, I'll take my Blender window and move it over to the side, and I have it side by side with the logo of the Kevin Cookie Company where, look at that, we have a chocolate chip cookie. I'd like to use this exact same color of brown. So I'll click in the base color, and here we have an eyedropper. I could also define specific values here, but let's take the color from this image. I'll click on the eyedropper, and let's go over. I'll take this color of brown. I'll click on that, and let's look back in Blender. So we've now applied the color. But wait, we just assigned a color. Why are we only seeing a gray-silver cookie in the viewport? Blender has several shading modes. In the top right-hand corner, we can see what they are. The first one is called wireframe, and if we click on that, we can see a wireframe image of our cookie. Now, the one we've been working in this entire video so far is solid mode, and here we see all the different solid objects. Now, right up on top, we also have some other modes. Here we have material preview. So let's click on that. And look at that. There's the shade of brown that we just added. And over on the right-hand side, we also have the rendered view. And there too, we see the brown. Let's go back into the material preview for now. The material preview mode shows you how the materials will appear with lighting even without rendering it. Now, if you want a fully lit preview, click on this option right here. But this one's a little bit heavier in your system depending on your lighting and your render engine setup. Now, right over here, this is the one that we start in by default called the solid mode. And this doesn't show you any materials or textures. For now, let's stick in this view. Let's now add a material to one of our chocolate chips, and we'll do it the same way we added a material to the cookie. Let's select one of the chocolate chips. I'll select this one right here. Then over on the right-hand side, make sure to click into the material view. And over here, we can see the base color. Currently, it's this whitish gray color. That's not going to work for a chocolate chip. So here we could click on that. Now let's take this window. I'm going to move it over, and let's use this to help guide the color. So over here, click on base color, and let's use the eyedropper tool. I'll click on that, and let's use one of these nice dark chocolate chips. That one looks really good. Now let's expand this window again, and there I could see the material applied to this chocolate chip. That looks really good. Now, of course, I want to apply that same material to all of these other chocolate chips, but I don't want to have to go through one by one applying the base color. So instead, let's select each chocolate chip and press the Shift key to make multiple selections. And over here, I'll go through and I'll select all of the different chocolate chips on this cookie. We have a lot. Then let's select the very last one. And on your keyboard, press the Control key together with L. This way you can link up all these different objects and you could decide what you want to link together. I'd like to link the materials. I'll click on that, and now all these different objects will link to the color that I had in the very last selection. Look at that, beautiful. Let's now add a material to the tray. I'll select the tray, and over here, let's add a new material. I'll click on Add. Let's click on the base color, and over here, maybe we go with a nice blue tray. That's kind of our signature Kevin Cookie Company color. I think that looks great. Let's click out of that, and there, we now have all the different materials down. Now that we've added some materials and color, let's add some lighting to our cookie scene. We already have one light in our scene, and this one was included by default. To preview what this looks like, right up on top, let's shift into the rendered view. And when I turn that on, there we could see the light. Now, I'm not sure if I'm really all that thrilled with the way this light looks, so let's actually remove this one and we'll add a new light. Over in the outliner, here we see the light. Make sure to select that, and let's press the Delete key. Now we've removed all the lights, and you see that this cookie is just pretty much in the dark. To add a new light, let's press the Shift-A key. This way we could add a new object. And within this menu, let's go down to the option that says Light. And right here, we have a few different options. We could add a point light, and that's what we already had. We could add sunlight, a spotlight, or an area light. I think an area light will work very well for this scene, so let's select this. We've now added the light object, and let's move it. So here, I'll take this handle and let's drag it up. And look at that, you can already see the light having a little bit of an impact. But the light's pretty weak. Let's pull it up a little bit and let's see if we could increase the power on this. With the area light selected, over on the right-hand side, we have all of our properties. Down at the bottom, we have this green light bulb icon. Select that, and here we have all the different controls for this light. We could adjust things like the temperature, the power, the exposure, and you have all sorts of different options. Let's up the power. Currently it's set to 10, but let's increase that. Here, let's drag that over, and maybe we go with, let's say 800 or 850. I think that's a good amount. Now, I want this to have a warm feel and vibe to it, so I'd like to lower the temperature. Here, I'll check this. Now, 6500 is a little bit cool, so let's press and hold on that, and I can drag it over, so that gives it a warmer feel. We'll go with maybe about 4000 Kelvin. I think that looks really nice. We can now adjust this area light, just like any other object. So here I have the light selected, and we have the Move tool currently enabled. I'll pull this over, and let's put it off to the side. And I'd also like to rotate it. So I'll go over to the left-hand side. Let's click on rotate, and here let's rotate it so it's facing the cookie a little bit more. Now look at this. We see the light hitting this part of the plate first, and then we see a nice shadow down here. And here we can kind of orbit around to see what this looks like. I think that looks beautiful. You've done such a fantastic job following along. Now it's time to frame our cookie and capture the final image. This cookie is looking well lit and I'm ready to render it. But before we can do that, we have to choose the frame that we would like to render, or basically the view that we would like to capture. To do that, over on the right-hand side, we have this camera icon. You can also press 0 on your numpad. So let's press that. And right here, I can see the current view of the cookie. Now, that's pretty much all cookie, and we don't really see much of the tray. So I want to modify this frame. To modify the frame, there are a few different ways you could go about doing it. Over here, I'll click out of the frame view. You can take the camera, I'll select this object, and then you can move it around, and you can also adjust the rotation. But sometimes it's hard to tell what exactly it's looking at. So here's an even easier way to choose your frame. Let's go back over and click on the camera icon, and there again, we see the frame. So anything within this rectangle will be rendered. And again, we'd like to include more. So let's click on this icon, or if you remember from earlier, you could always press the N key on your keyboard. And here, that opens up the sidebar. Within the sidebar, there is a tab titled View. Let's click on that. And right down here, we can lock the camera to the view. So basically, whatever view we choose in this viewport, it'll then attach that to this camera frame. So let's test this out. Here, I'll click in the viewport, and here, I'll zoom out a little bit, and you'll notice that it's also adjusting the frame. Now, I could use all of our standard movement tools. I could press my middle mouse, I could pan with the shift key in the middle mouse, or here I could use my mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So let's see if we could find a nice composition. I kind of like this. I kind of like being at the cookie's level. Let's see if we could pan over a little bit here, maybe zoom out a bit so we see more of the tray. And I think this will be a really nice shot right there. Now that I found the perfect frame, one thing you'll want to make sure to remember to uncheck right over here, uncheck camera to view. Otherwise, if you continue orbiting around, that will set your new frame. And I like this frame and I'd like to keep that, so I don't want to change it anymore. I'll make sure to uncheck that. Now that we're all done working with the sidebar, you can press the N key and that'll hide it again. Once you're happy with your frame, over in the bottom right-hand corner, let's go to the Properties pane. And right here, we see an image of the back of a camera. Let's click on that. And here we can see all the different settings that we'll use to render this. As an example, right up on top, you can select the render engine. Currently, it's set to Eevee, and that's very performant. But when I click on this dropdown, we could also try cycles. And when I click on that, you'll see a different image. I like the way this one looks. So I'll use cycles. Down below, you could also select the device. Currently, it's set to my CPU, but here I could also switch it to my GPU. I'm now all good with these settings. So up on the top bar, let's click on render. And here we have the option to render the image. Now right over here, you'll also see that the shortcut key is F12. Let's click on this. It's now all done rendering. To save a copy of your image right here, let's click on the image menu. And then you could go down to save as and save your image on your computer. And just like that, you just rendered your first Blender project. Very nice work. And congratulations, that's your first Blender project. One delicious chocolate chip cookie, proudly baked at the Kevin Cookie Company. Let me know if you want to see more Blender tutorials right down below in the comments, and let me know what specific topics. Please consider subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next video.